Good afternoon, colleagues, friends, family from the faculty. Welcome to our very first Transferable Successes webinar in the faculty. Some of you might be aware that on the 16th of June this year, the Dean launched the implementation plan for the faculty transformation framework. And the dean has said to the community of the faculty that most of us should be aware that there is such a thing as the transformation framework. Many of us should have read it. And certainly all the leaders in the organization should be incredibly familiar with it and know exactly what it is that is expected of them. So as part of that process, one of the promises and the commitments that we made is that we are aware that within the faculty, there have been many successes that have been had with regards to transformation. And that we didn't want to start from a clean page as if nothing has happened, and wanted to amplify the great work that has been done by our colleagues. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I realize that I didn't even introduce myself. My name is Tracy Naledi. I am the Deputy Dean for Health Services. This is one of the responsibilities that I have to coordinate the transferable successes in collaboration with the TEC. So as you are aware, the TEC was at the forefront of developing the transformation framework, and as the deanery, we are working very closely with them to make sure that it's not just a document that sits in somebody's drawer or sits in and is a beautiful document that sits in your cupboard or in your bookcase, but it's actually a living document that we use. It's a living document that we use as our guiding document to what it is that we need to do to change our institutional culture in the faculty. So we are very excited to learn from the different departments and all the wonderful work that has been done by the departmental transformation and equity committees, and I'm aware that they call themselves different things, and we have been in collaboration with the TEC to see how we can make this happen. So today we have one presentation. We were supposed to have two presenters. The presentations are both coming from IDM. Thank you very much, IDM, for putting your hand up and being the first in line to say we want to go out there and share what it is we're doing. We appreciate your efforts. Unfortunately, our co-presenter Felix Dube is not well. Dr. Felix Dube is not well, who is a co-chair with Dr. Crystal De Beer at IDM. They are the co-chairs of the TEC in IDM. Unfortunately, Felix is not with us, but Crystal will fill in for him. And so Crystal will do the presentation and take both parts that were meant to be done by the colleagues. After the presentation, there will be time for discussion, and Professor Zenda Woodman, who is the co-chair of the faculty TEC, will facilitate the discussion. And then in the end, we will also hear from our Dean, Associate Professor Lionel Green Thompson, who will then do the wrap up and give us some closing comments. So that is the conversation for today, and we've left plenty of time for us to really discuss and hear questions from you. So we hope that this will be a fruitful discussion. So without any further ado, I really would like to hand over to Crystal De Beers, who is a research enterprise manager at IDM and the co-chair of the TEC within IDM. And thank you so much, Crystal, and over to you. We really look forward to hear all your successes, your challenges, and to learn from you and the work that you all have been doing in IDM. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy. Like Tracy mentioned, I am from the IDM, and I will be sharing some of our successes the interventions we've implemented at the IDM over the course of the past 3 years or so. The interventions are at various levels, from smaller scale to slightly more elaborate interventions, and I think it's useful to present on a range of possible interventions at different levels that can be undertaken. If any of this inspires you or sparks an idea in your mind about something you can do at your department. But before I start, I just wanted to give a brief introduction to the IDM. So we are a research institute that works on a membership model, and we take our members from 2 faculties at UCT. So from the Health Sciences faculty as well as the Faculty of Science. And we've got 4 membership categories. 3 of them are for people based and employed at UCT, and then we've got an adjunct membership category for people who are based at other institutions across the world. Our members lead various research groups, and within those research groups they employ staff and students. And we've got quite a large staff and student complement that are based in the member groups, but they do all have departmental homes within UCT. And we've got a variety of sites where research is conducted, the clinical sites by the various member groups. So you'll notice we've got SATV and the CIDRI Africa and the Desmond Tutu Health Foundation, who have sites all over the Western Cape. And as I mentioned, we've got various member groups that then make up our membership, and at different sizes, different fields of approaching infectious disease and molecular research from different perspectives. And each of these groups, some of these groups also have URC accreditation, so they are also research entities as the IDM is, but based still within the IDM. And so got a little bit ahead of myself there. So the IDM is not an academic department, which makes it's a slightly different context in which we operate, and we're governed by a board. As I mentioned, we've got departments, members who come from departments, and they may also be involved in departmental transformation initiatives. And so the initiatives at the IDM are very heavily reliant on volunteers. We've got a small staff establishment, but most of the staff are appointed in academic departments, as I've mentioned. And of course, because of this, the IDM leadership is not involved in the recruitment or selection of postgraduate students, postdocs, or staff based in academic departments. And of course, importantly, we're not involved in undergraduate teaching. And so within this context, the IDM embraces transformation in its broadest sense. So the 4 key areas we really focus on is changing the research culture, supporting emerging researchers, and fostering an inclusive working environment and a sense of belonging with which all staff and students can identify. And so what I will be talking to is broadly these four areas and the initiatives that we've implemented in trying to address these aspects. So starting off with the institutional change, at the IDM, as I've mentioned, we're a membership structure. So the IDM constitution outlines how the IDM will be structured, but also the guidelines for membership and the criteria to join, to become part of the IDM. So what we've done is to change our constitution to use gender neutral pronouns in alignment with the UCT policy on inclusivity. We also developed a value statement recently, which I will discuss in a little bit more detail in a minute. And we've changed our membership guidelines to then reflect the value statement of the IDM. So the membership guidelines are based on the vision, mission, and value statements of the IDM. And these all speak to excellence, collaboration, and transformation. So we've really tried to foreground the things that we feel are the most important to hold up as a member of the IDM, and what we expect our member groups to adhere to. But just before I continue, I think it's important to note that in the IDM, transformation influences the thinking of many structure. It's really a collaborative effort across the education task team, the space and facilities committee, and the membership committee. So as I've mentioned before, we've changed our membership guidelines, and this was an initiative driven by the membership committee and a working group we established specifically to look at our membership guidelines. And as I will be continuing, I will note where there's been overlap between the various committees in implementing some of our initiatives. So to guide the activities that we felt were important to support in line with transformation, we sent out a series of surveys in 2017 to our past staff and to postdocs to identify where they felt that we needed to design initiatives and interventions. And so I will be detailing some of the outcomes that has resulted from these surveys. So these are broadly categorized as the support we give. And the first initiative I'll be discussing is our mentorship program, which was established in 2017 under the education task team. And it works on a match-up model where mentees and mentors are matched, and we survey them annually to determine the quality of the mentorship relationship, what is lacking, and what kind of training or events they feel are necessary to further develop the mentorship relationship. Our mentees are mostly postgrads, postdocs, or research officers, and our mentors are either members of the IDM or affiliated with the IDM in some way. The initiative is led by Helen Cox and Lindy Mason, who are both members of the IDM. As an outcome of the membership mentorship surveys, we found that the postdocs and postgrads were really looking for advice about career development. And so as an outcome, we held an alternative career seminar series in 2018, where we invited speakers who had pursued a postgraduate degree but never pursued an academic career to speak about how they found their way. And this was very well received. It was 4 seminars over the course of 4 weeks. And in 2019, a group of postgrads and postdocs approached us and the faculty research office as well to support a 2-day career development workshop. And again, this was supported through the education task team. And the workshop was hosted at the beginning of the year. And as you can see from the photo, was well attended. We had 100 postgrads and postdocs attending from various faculties in UCT, but also from universities around the Western Cape. So it wasn't exclusively UCT students who attended. And then following obviously from that, another important initiative that was driven by the education task team is the postdoc retreat, which we held in February 2018. It was supplemented later in the year with a writing workshop, and that was well received and well attended. And we are proposing to host another retreat in 2021. So next year. And of course, another important development in the postdoc space has been the forming the POSTDOC Association. So it was recently established, probably about 2 months ago now, and they selected two chairs. And this POSTDOC Association is for postdocs by postdocs. So it's completely up to them to structure the association as they see fit. They engage with the IDM Exco via the Transformation Committee, so they'll feed back to myself and to Felix any issues that are raised at the forum when they meet. And then we feed this back to Exco. And the Exco has committed to addressing any challenges raised by the POSTDOC Association as is within the locus of our control too, and if not, to escalate or assist the POSTDOC Association with escalating it to the relevant structures in the faculty and university. And we're really, really excited about this development, and we look forward to seeing how it evolves over time. Then just talking broadly to some additional financial support that we offer. There are 3 honours bursaries that we made available this year and will be making available again next year. And this is administered through the honours program. We also have 2 technical skills training grants that we make available to earlier career researchers to further their training. And then in 2019, CIDRI, who is a member group of the IDM, launched a Past Professional Development Award initiative, and it was well received. There was a lot of enthusiasm for it, and so we're proposing to use this model next year to offer awards to past staff who belong to any IDM member group that isn't necessarily associated with CIDRI Africa, and we hope that this will also yield some exciting developments in the future. Lastly, I just want to speak broadly to in the category of support to resource documents that we created. We recognize that because of the structure of the IDM, it's often challenging for staff and students to access information or know where to go to find information about the policies and procedures that are available within the faculty and within UCT. And so we first created a resource document about the policies and procedures for reporting allegations of discrimination, harassment, and violence. But then after that, it also led to the development of other resource documents about the development resources at UCT, so education and training opportunities, but also staff and student wellness at UCT. And these resource documents are on our website, on our intranet, and it has been exceptionally helpful for our mentorship program. The mentors were concerned that if a mentee approached them with a specific problem that they were unable to assist them with, where they could go to find additional support or resources within UCT. And so these resource documents have been quite helpful in addressing those kinds of challenges. Then speaking to creating an inclusive culture, we usually start the year with an induction session about how the IDM is structured, specifically because it is a research entity and how it then, or a URC accredited research entity, and how it then operates and engages with academic departments and with the faculty and with the university. We invite speakers from HR, from postgrad office to talk about the processes and policies that they've got in place to support staff and students, but also we invite the chairs of the Transformation Committee, our education task team, our mentorship program, to talk about what initiatives are available within the program, how you can get involved, and to really ask for volunteers, because as I stated earlier, we're heavily reliant on volunteers to really drive these initiatives and to implement any new ideas. We host the annual IDM soccer tournament. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. It was first started in 2016 and it has really grown over the past 4 years with more and more teams signing on, not just from the IDM, but also from the various other, example from finance, we had a team, and from the various other research groups. Because of overcommitments on my part, because I mainly drive the soccer tournament in 2019, it was decided that we weren't going to host the soccer tournament in 2019. And after that communication went out, a group of postgraduate students and postdocs just mobilized and approached us and said, this is too important. It's an event that must stay on the IDM calendar, and we will volunteer to organize the tournament. And so in a matter of a month, they put together everything and hosted the soccer tournament at the end of 2019. And I think this really speaks to how valuable these kinds of social engagements are for creating this inclusive culture. Also, in that same vein, we have the coffee club that we started in 2018, and it's once a month people come together and just have a cup of coffee that is sponsored by the IDM. And it is, when there's free food, I guess you can always count on people showing up. But it's been well attended. Every month we've hosted it, we've had at least between 70 and 100 people attending. And I think that the popularity of the event really illustrates that people want opportunities to engage in a more informal manner, not just at the weekly seminar or what other formal structures exist, but also in a more informal way. In response to the sexual and gender-based violence campaign UCT launched in last year, we also put together a pledge, and we at one of our coffee clubs we introduced the pledge to the members of the IDM and the research groups, and asked them to show their support for our pledge by putting their fingerprint on it. We had a printout in the foyer there. You could see the deputy director putting his fingerprint on there, and it was, for me, quite moving to see the amount of people who were willing to publicly step up and show their support of this pledge against intimidation, harassment, and violence. It was a very, very moving experience for me, at least. Then we've got our postgraduate student publication competition that usually happens about this time of the year. Students who are first authors on an article are invited to submit their article in either one of two categories, either original research article or a review article. This is sent to an external panel to evaluate, and then the winners are selected. You can see the winners from the past 2 years down in the photos down there. We've just received our latest batch, and they've been sent off for evaluation. And I think the director of the IDM, Val Misrai, is also on the call, and I think she will agree with me when I say that the quality of the publications we receive, it is absolutely amazing. It's definitely something to be really proud of, and to give students opportunity to showcase the work they're doing. It's definitely very, very exciting to see. Just to speak broadly about some initiatives that we sponsor or co-sponsor, so it's not something that we specifically host, but we feel is definitely worthwhile to support. Africa Day is one of these, and I've selected, I've decided to put up a graphic there of our demographics of our postdocs and postgraduate students to show the percentage of students who hail from African countries outside of South Africa. And you can see it's about 40% of our postdocs and over 25% of our postgrads who are from African countries. And so this is definitely a very important event for us to support. Last year it was obviously an in-person event, and it is loads of fun. It goes well into the evening with music and dancing, and it's great fun to attend. Unfortunately, this year we had to do it online, but hopefully next year again for Africa Day we'll be able to meet face to face. We also sponsor some outreach activities to grade 10, 11 and 12 learners, and these are also initiatives driven by other groups or within the IDM or divisions to which members of the IDM belong. But I think an important initiative that I just want to speak to briefly is IWOSA. It's a social responsiveness initiative that was established in the MMRU, and of course the member groups in the IDM all start various social responsiveness initiatives. But this one is particularly interesting to talk about because it was established in 2013, and it's grown a lot over the past few years. And in 2019, they piloted a public engagement coursework component for the BMed honours students, and that was implemented in 2019. And this year, they received a postdoctoral research fellowship in public funding for this fellowship, for fellowship in public engagement. And this fellow will be hosted in the IDM, and this is really a very exciting development, and we quite keen to see the outcomes of this fellowship as it progresses over time. Lastly, I just want to speak to spaces to create a sense of belonging. As many of you will have noticed, the WOLFSON Pavilion foyer underwent a massive renovation over the course of the December-January break this year. And the space, and this is a area where the Space and Facilities Committee really got involved in bringing about this change. And so what we needed to understand is what was lacking in the space and what could foster a greater sense of belonging. So we sent out quite a lot of surveys. We engaged with quite a few user groups within the IDM and member groups to get their feedback and ideas. And we then redesigned the foyer. Unfortunately, I don't have photos. I would have loved to show you what it looks like now. But what we essentially created was some informal meeting spaces, some co-working spaces, and redesigning the cafeteria area so it's easier to move tables together if large groups wanted to sit together and have lunch together, and just trying to make the space more amenable to that kind of collaboration. We had some other ideas that came out of the survey. One was to display our value statements in the foyer area, and we'll definitely look into doing that in this coming year. And then the inclusion of vernacular in the foyer area, but also throughout the IDM complex where appropriate. Putting up an exhibition space, because often from our community engagement projects, there's some artwork that is produced or posters that's produced, and having a place to put that up. And then an interesting proposal that came forward was to collaborate with MICHAELIS to produce artworks. And unfortunately, we were unable to pursue it this year. It was on the agenda to kick it off this year, where students in their curatorship elective would partner with a postdoc or postgrad from the IDM to develop an artwork. And we would take them to visit one of our clinical sites so they could see the interface between the clinic and the clinical studies in the community. And then also take them into the labs so they could see the other side of the coin, and to develop an installation in the IDM cafeteria that's really representative of what it is that we do at the IDM and captures all the aspects of what we are involved in. And I think I'm going to stop there and open the floor for questions. Thank you.
Just, oh. Thank you very much. I think I was on mute. Thank you very much, Crystal. I think IDM has really done some fantastic work, and I love the way you've really taken support to look at it into its multiple dimensions, and starting all the way from your potential students who are not even at varsity, exposing them to kind of what you do, taking it through to the current postgraduate students, all the way through to your postdocs, and it's really admirable. I'm sure there's going to be lots of discussion, and I would like to welcome and introduce my colleague, Professor Zenda Woodman, who's the co-chair of the TEC, who will facilitate the discussion and the questions that you might have. Please feel free to use the chat box to ask questions that we will then to a field. Over to you, Zenda, and thank you very much for doing this with us. Thanks.
Thanks, Tracy, and thanks so much to Crystal, because I think it really tells us what's happening on the ground in departments and in units, especially within research units where you have different types of challenges as in other departments. So we always hear the same thing in terms of that transformation is happening too slowly. And so I think it comes a lot from how people on the ground feel and a lot of corridor conversations. So what I was wondering whether Crystal could maybe just tell me how you will be measuring the change in how people on the ground experience your interventions and whether it's actually had an impact on their own lived experience.
That's a very good question, Zenda, and I think you make a good point. It is important to test the temperature, to keep being engaged with the people you're trying to serve. We've got like I said, all of our committees are reliant on volunteers, and we try and keep the flow of volunteers through the committees to stay fresh, to have new staff and students on there so we can get new perspectives, but also to stay connected to what people are feeling. And we trust that people will be honest with their colleagues in those corridor conversations more than they may feel to be honest to a chair of a committee necessarily. But surveys are a really good way to keep in touch and to see what we're doing. It's possible to have anonymous surveys, and so whenever we do send out a survey, we generally get a good response, between 15 and 20% response, which is as good as you can expect from a survey, I guess. And those help us to stay in touch with what people need. I think also by establishing more associations that are run, so like the Postdoc Association, by postdocs, for postdocs, I think it will be a more honest forum. And I think feedback from that can be anonymized and then fed back to the Transformation Committee and to the EXCO will allow us to see what the real sense is of the people in the IDM. So I think the more those kinds of forums exist for people where they feel safe, where they feel they can be honest, and where the feedback can be anonymized and sent through to us, we can then address that kind of the issues that are raised there and really try and see where we can improve and where we can design more effective interventions.
Thanks, Crystal. I must say that the intervention that the IDM have initiated is really quite holistic and actually responds to all the pillars of the UCT and the Faculty Transformation Committee. So I mean, kudos to you guys. I think it's an amazing job. So there's a question in the chat. It's about translating research knowledge to be more inclusive and understandable to people on the ground. So I don't think Crystal is the only person that needs to answer these questions. Please feel free to put up your hand, and then we can also have proper discussion around these topics.
Sure.
Crystal, would you like to start?
Sure. I mean, I'm not that involved in the social responsiveness and public engagement component of translating research to something that's more relatable for the community. I know our member groups are very involved in that, especially Desmond Tutu, as you would know, and sadly, they've even at CIDRI, they've got a public engagement officer whose responsibility is to really get to grips with those kinds of topics. So I can't really speak too broadly about that, unfortunately.
Is there anybody else who would like to comment or just add something about that? Because, I mean, the discussion is primarily transferable successes. So we would very much also like to consider the challenges that we all face within transformation and learn from what Christel has presented. And perhaps it would really help if we could explain the challenges that we all face, trying to implement our transformation initiatives within our various departments or units. And then we can have a discussion around that. And this could potentially include translating research into a more community-based endeavor. So I really would appreciate some sort of participation. I'm supposed to be a facilitator of discussion, so please allow me to facilitate.
Maybe while you wait, Zenda, I can speak to some of the challenges we experience. I think our biggest issue, like I was saying, is everything is volunteer based. And I think, you know, with people being part of a member group in the IDM, maybe they're part of another accredited entity, they're part of a department, they're part of a division, you get sort of volunteer fatigue because it's always the same people who put up their hands and then eventually they serve on all the committees. And I think it can get quite exhausting and put quite a lot of strain on you. So I think that is definitely a big challenge. And if you don't have volunteers, it's time consuming. A lot of these initiatives take time to plan and you know, to implement and to measure and to really make sure that they're achieving their goal. And if you, like I said, if you don't have the capacity or the bandwidth or the time to really devote to it, then you're definitely gonna you know, it's going to be a lot more challenging to see that the kind of change we want to see as quickly as we want to see it, just because there's not enough legs on the ground.
Yeah. So there are two other questions. So I am. Oh, Val, would you like to say something? I see you flashing across the screen.
Yeah, I would. Thanks. Firstly, thanks, Christel, especially for also stepping in for Felix as well. Zenda, I think you've asked a critically important question, which I would like to get other feedback on, and that is, how does one do impact assessment? You know, feel good about doing things, and we can have events and we can have programs and we can do mentorship, and impact assessment is one of the hardest things to do when one is trying to change a culture or build something new. I would really love to know what other people have experienced. I mean, you know, we default to surveys when we don't have better ways. I am acutely aware of the challenges that are imposed by hierarchies that students in particular and postdocs as well have in going to the and coming and knocking on my door, for example. There have been many instances in which I wish that I had heard about them far more directly than via the grapevine. Sadly, the grapevine operates, corridor talk operates. We know about this at UCT. It is extremely difficult for leaders to be kept in the dark around matters that may be bubbling and that they might have their finger on the pulse on. So I would very much like a bit of a discussion around that. Apropos your question of how can we communicate, I think someone asked, how can we communicate what we're doing in the research in a more digestible way? I think that Christel should also take credit for really brainstorming around the appointment of Nobongo. Nobongo Kolo is the comms research communications officer, who is split between the Institute and the Faculty of Health Sciences. And Nobongo does not come from a science background, and many of the pieces that you'll see with her byline are pieces that are focused much more around the people who've done the work, as well as working together with the researchers to try to bring it home and make it real. And some of her articles, I think, are really quite exceptional. We've also got a lot of people who are contributing to the conversation. as the publication of vehicle for public engagement. So I actually think on the communications front we're doing quite well. But as I said, I would love to hear more and be given advice and pointers as to how we can get much better two-way communication between struggling and want to see change, but think that we're either not doing it well or going about it the wrong way. Okay, thanks, Zenda.
Thanks very much, Val. I really appreciate that. And I think it is a good point, and we should spend some time discussing that. There are other questions in the chat, but are there any other comments that relate specifically to how do we measure the effectiveness of our transformation initiatives? Please just butt in because I can't actually see any hands.
Yeah, so maybe I can share two things on my side, is to say that one of the other commitments that the faculty has made to the community is that we will have an annual survey that we will do, and to Val's point around how do we know when we've made a difference. So what we've done together with the TEC is looked at that chapter 4 of the transformation framework in terms of what our objectives are, you know, what it is, where do we want to go? And so we've tried to use that as a guide of a survey, not just that's looking at people's experiences, which is very important indicator for how things are changing when you're talking about impact, and seeing how that changes over time. In addition, the DVC for Transformation recently put out, there's, for example, an expectation that each of the faculties will put together a kind of a transformation plan. As part of that, there are targets. For example, off the top of my head, one that I remember is this notion of having students voluntarily report their race. It's one of the indicators, because the view is that perhaps students are not reporting their race because they fear victimization. And the idea is that perhaps one of the indicators we can look at is if people can understand why it's important for us to monitor our demographic breakdown, that if students feel confident and free, they know that that will not be used against them. It's purely a kind of an indicator to measure how inclusive you are being. That's one of the indicators that is there. So I mean, the DVC for Transformation has come up with a few indicators that that try and answer that question, Val, that you've asked. But I do recognize that measuring impact is very important. But at the end of the day, it's the experience that our staff and students would feel. Thank you, Zenda.
Thank you. Could I ask if there's anybody who's on this call who can actually speak to their experience in getting information from the departments or from their members, even if it's in their units, how they've managed to gauge how they are coping or how they are feeling, working and sort of, well, living, because most of us live here, well, not now, in the institution. Are there any examples that's been successful, or you feel as being successful?
There's a message here on the chat from Stuart Moore, who has a suggestion, and says that it is labor intensive, but a more qualitative manner in having key interviews with members of staff to ascertain the impact of transformation might be a good idea. And certainly that's a very good idea. So in terms of the ethics protocol that we've submitted for the annual transformation survey, we have requested an opportunity to do qualitative interviews as well. So Stuart, we agree with you that it is important to also get people's sense.
So if I could comment on that, Tracy, as well. As Stuart may know, exit interviews are an option for staff when they leave the institution. I have been involved in a few myself, and I do think that adding to that exit interview should be questions around institutional culture. We tend to treat these in a very discreet way. People often choose not to share the information as to why they're leaving. Okay, I've certainly had several experiences where I tried to dig deep to get more information about why a person is leaving, and I'm left with suspicion as opposed to fact. And so I do think that idea is a very, very good one. And of course, it's going to be subject to where the staff members to go. There have been, I've seen experiences in which people just say it's easiest for them to let it go, and they would rather just leave and start again. And put what was clearly in one case in particular that loses my mind, clearly a bad experience, which unfortunately had only come to the fore before the damage I felt was very difficult to repair. I think there's another question, Colette Dandara. Thank you, Colette, for the comments. In the interests of being up and using these sessions in the most useful way, I should tell you we have had difficult experiences in the Institute, Colette. And one in particular, I can tell you about what we did to respond to. There had been some corridor talk about racism, and there was a sense that there was racism prevailing in groups or in, hard to tell, was it department, was it institute, but it had come to my attention. Every effort I made to try to get to the bottom of where being victimized, who was experiencing this, and to get more facts, okay, that I could deal with, or do a blank. Okay. And so what I decided to do was to actually call a meeting, and I think Zenda, if I remember correctly, you were at that meeting. It was IBMS, Pathology Institute. We got together the heads of department, the TEC chairs. We just acknowledged there's a problem. And in fact, the resource Crystal talked about was a consequence of that discussion, because I got the sense that people simply didn't know how and where to go for help and support. I don't want to whitewash this and say that producing a resource document is a solution. It is absolutely not a solution, but it helps to at least put into people's inboxes places to go. Where I still am concerned, and I keep coming back to this issue, I feel frustrated at UCT that people do not directly, are not far more direct at speaking truth to power. Okay. And I think it is a very difficult space for us to navigate, because there's a lot of power, and I'm fully aware of the power that I hold. I've often said that a strange thing about my job is that I've got a lot of responsibility but relatively little authority. Authority vests in heads of department, actually. I have more responsibility on health and safety than anything else. But there is so much difficulty we have in speaking out. And I think there's one thing that we've really got to try and do, and I'm speaking very personally here, is to try and make it okay for a person to speak and for a senior person in leadership to hear and to respond, and for both sides to hear each other. And when we talk about difficult conversations, this is what I am referring to. I've been in some, but I don't think I've been in enough, because somehow the stories don't directly to me, they go around me, and they circle around the exco. And I think I probably speak for many heads of department in expressing that as a frustration. So any help that can come, any advice, any suggestions of how to break those barriers, I feel I would personally find very valuable.
Thank you, Val. Zenda, can I speak?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Val, for your comments. I think first I just want to acknowledge the beautiful presentation and the work that the IDM is catalyzing, especially towards transformation. I think speaking as a former chair for transformation in the faculty, I think we need now to move towards where, as much as we share the glory of what has gone right, we should just oppose it against what were the issues in the system last year. We can say we had these issues and how we resolved them. That way we can start now to be sounding bells to what is wrong in the system and possibly arrest some of the things before they happen. because if we just continue to be painting a rose picture, there will be, I mean, in the system we could be having all these beautiful things alongside some people suffering. And one of the things is actually, you mentioned it, Val, the power dynamics, where individuals are unable to challenge. But I think we should make it okay that actually you could call Ed Starek, you could call Colette and say, look, your postdoc is not happy. Can we find a way that this postdoc can have a better experience in this environment? Not as a punitive way, but as a way to really create space for the less, let's say, those who are in a junior position. So that's my comment, a balanced presentation of the transformation imperative and what we have experienced in this space. Because those who have complained, when they see this report, they will get into a shell and say, look, they will always say the other voice and my voice is not being heard. Thank you so much.
Val, would you like to?
No, Colette is he's absolutely right. In fact, transferable successes is maybe a misnomer. It's transferable experiences, okay? And I would like to transfer an experience that I have found it as a leader in this faculty difficult to get my ear to the ground. And I attribute that to power dynamics, to all being incredibly busy trying to just keep afloat, and crisis management and these types of issues which are always there. But Colette, and given that this is the first example, okay, the first one that's come forward, I think that we can really share both successes, and I do think that in what Crystal has put together, there are some achievements there that I'm very proud of, and I believe have had a significant impact on how we're all thinking about our environment. But that, and couple that with some of these deep-seated issues that in years, I mean, I'm almost 10 years now as Institute Director, I found particularly challenging in this environment. I remember one of the first things I told Lionel when he came, what he and I share, we were both at WITS, okay? And my experience at WITS is that when you go into a contested meeting, the AK-47 is on the table. You come to tea and the knife is behind the back. And I say that in a joking way, but actually in the truth. It's quite a polite environment here. And I think that people are very scared to speak up. And, you know, my commitment, more than saying my door is open, I do feel that I would love to hear how others are traversing this space. Other leaders, other people in middle management, how are they traversing this space? And that, as I said, I'm repeating myself, I would find helpful. So would our ITC, so would the Institute Executive.
Oh, Val, I think everyone would find that very helpful. Because in my experience, because as the TC co-chairs, we straddle both those that feel marginalized and those that are in power. And I can tell you that there is it doesn't fit. The stories never seem to gel. And I don't know why as well. Besides, it comes down to the power dynamic. And so I think when we're trying to change our institutional culture, we have to address the power dynamic and the hierarchical system that we have. But I would really like to have more discussion around this, just for maybe 3 minutes. Is there anybody else who would like to share how they as leaders have tried to overcome you know, the perception that if anybody comes forward, that they will be punished for coming forward? Is it an attitude? Is it a policy? Any suggestions would be. I'm looking in the chat, but I'm not seeing any clear.
There's Ed Starek, Zenda. Ed Starek is wanting to say something.
Okay.
Hi, Zenda. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
So I guess my comment sort of speaks in part to what you and Val have said, but also in part to the impact and assessment of, you know, these fantastic interventions and activities. And I mean, I think that what has been mentioned in terms of surveys and feedback from postdoc and postgrad associations is absolutely critical. But I think the open forums and workshops are also incredibly valuable. And in fact, I think you led a workshop a year or two ago, Zenda, on belonging. And these workshops aren't big crowd pullers. So, you know, there were probably about 40 or 50 students and staff who attended. But I learned an enormous amount about, you know, people's sense of belonging and confusion, that a lot of people within the IDM, some of them felt they belonged to the department, some of them felt they belonged to the IDM, some of them felt more of a sense of belonging just within their research group, and many didn't feel they belonged at all. So I think, you know, we really need to try and sort of assess how we are doing on sort of things like that, and whether we sort of are progressing, and these wonderful interventions are actually improving that sense of belonging, the research culture. And I'd be interested to know from Crystal, you know, whether this was sort of interrogated at all in the survey, and whether you were able to sort of gauge what the sense of belonging was within the number of people that responded to the survey. Thanks, Zenda.
Thanks, Ed. Crystal, are you still around?
Hi, yes, I am. Ed, to answer your question, I wasn't involved in the first series of surveys in 2017 because I wasn't at UCT at the time. But the surveys around the WOLFSON Pavilion redesign were more focused on identifying barriers than really understanding whether people feel like they belong. So we asked questions like, what prevents you from engaging with, of using the WOLFSON Pavilion foyer area for meetings? What prevents you from using the space? What is undesirable about the space? To make the space physically more welcoming, hoping that the physical barriers were removed, the other barriers would start to slowly dissolve from using the space as a sort of a collaborative or engaging kind of space. So it was a lot more practical in its focus, rather than understanding any emotional or psychological barriers that are making people feel like it's not a space where they feel they belong. So that's unfortunately all I can add on that point.
Thanks, Crystal. I think what I'm hearing is that there are so many small interventions that can ultimately add to which will reach a critical mass, where we will be able to find out as to how the people on the ground are actually experiencing our interventions. And this would involve multiple approaches, which of course takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. And this brings me to one of the questions from Lucretia. She'd like to know, where do you find the time to drive all of these initiatives, or do you have a secret time shop? So I think we all struggle with that in terms of juggling time to bring about all of these different attempts. And what I do want to also stress is that the departmental transformation committees, we do form a safe space for those people who do feel that they're not particularly happy with their circumstances, and that they can come to us. Of course, the problem is always that nobody wants to put their name to a complaint, and so it puts us in a very difficult position. And this is something that always comes up. So I think we need a lot more discussion around this one topic. How do we evaluate our interventions? How do we address the perception that people are in power, are powerful, and that they should realize that they are equally powerful, even more so. So I think that I want to wrap up, because I think we only have 7 minutes, and Lionel is still going to want to address us and tell us how wonderful we are. So if there are no other questions, Stacey, have I missed something anywhere? Because if not, then I will. Hi, Tracy.
No, I think that our time is up, and I don't want to, I know people have things to get to because we're scheduled to end at 2. And I think this is, as we've said, this will be, there'll be other conversations and we'll pick these issues up. And I think, so far as to say that I think we can thank Zenda and Crystal for Crystal for a fantastic presentation from IDM, and Zenda for facilitating the discussion. Thank you very much. And in the last few minutes, Dean, I really would like to welcome you to give us our closing remarks on this first transformation successes and experiences as Val recommended around this. Over to you, Dean.
So I hope that I'm looking in the right direction, because my webcams are facing all sorts of directions today. I think I want to make a couple of points only, and I think that for me, I'm beginning to recognize that we're a work in progress. And therefore, transferable success doesn't mean that we have completed the journey. It really means that we are recognizing ways in which we are succeeding. And so I wouldn't change what we call these events, because the success here is that we have a research institute presenting a roadmap of how they have chosen to go. So that for me is the success that we celebrate in this event. I think that what's come through very strongly for me is the essential nature of relationships in these spaces. But what it does also say is that for those of us who perceive ourselves to be in power or to be in positions where we lead groups, I think we need to increase the level at which we're acting with intention. And rather than trying to count the way we're succeeding, that we create spaces for reflection on what's working and what isn't, and that we recognize that that reflection is a continuous cycle, but essentially that regardless of how difficult that reflection is, we are open to acting again and perhaps changing the idea with which we started. But I really, really want to thank the IDM for taking this first step for us as faculty. I think the significance is that you're regarded in very many ways as the research trust within the faculty. And when our research activity begins to have this conversation with sincerity and with openness, I think we begin to walk in a positive direction. Part of the training is to train people to speak truth to power. I mean, Mark's story in the chat is quite powerful about how long it takes. Val speaks about the fact that in a board meeting at WITS, the AKs are on the table. But when I came into those board meetings, it often took me a year before I made my first contribution. And that's the nature of how we grow in these various spaces. But I think what I'm hearing today is build the relationship, act with intention, take the time to reflect on that action and see if it has been the right thing or not. And that's the only way we improve the work in progress. But congratulations for today. I think it's been an exceptional start to conversations we need to have in so many spaces. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lionel. And thank you very much to our presenters and to the TEC. In particular, thank you so much to Val and the management of IDM for really ensuring that this work is seen as important, and you as management have made sure that it's foregrounded. You've provided resources for it, you've supported it, and you've been willing to go the extra mile to make sure it works. So thank you very much, colleagues, and please keep your eyes open for the next Transferable Successes webinar as we continue with the conversation. Have a fantastic afternoon. Thank you.